Tom Wilson needs much of an introduction. Um, So what I'm going to let Tom is just take a few minutes to let us know what he's been up to lately. He's now the Chief Innovation Officer and CEO of the Jack Russell Coding School. So, just for everybody's information, it'd be good to just kind of get the latest update. From a perspective standpoint, it's the only coding school privately operating coding school in the Charleston region. So I think that's kind of significant. And I can't think of Tom and Trip as partner of this. They're two better qualified people to be doing that because, among other things, has a great passion, for code education and that kind of stuff. So just a little update before you jump into React.
Yeah. So I'm Tom Wilson. I've been around this community for since 1995, so it's been a while. Seen it grow, and it's a pleasure to be here today. What I'm doing recently is we just finished our 5th cohort at the JRS Coding School. And the JRS Coding School is a 3 times a year, 12-week, full stack JavaScript course, which takes you from learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all the way to knowing things like React, MySQL, CouchDB, Node.js, Express.js. So really core tools that you need to know, and core concepts like functional programming to really be a professional in this day and age as a developer. I also am the Chief Technology Innovation Officer at Tabula Rasa Healthcare, and what we do is focus on medication risk. So we deal with patients that are on anywhere from 10 to 15 medications, and we provide science and services that help them really mitigate risk, which means stay out of the hospital, stay out of ER visits, because that's a huge cost. And we're very much a leader in the value services based model of healthcare, which means companies benefit by keeping you healthy other than getting paid for treating your symptoms. So that's a lot of fun. And I love JavaScript. So I know JavaScript is a lot of controversy, but it is the world's largest language.
You put that as a bullet point?
Absolutely. I didn't always love it. I'll be honest with you. I remember a time where I really asked developers to avoid it at all possible circumstances, but it's come a long way, and it does a lot of neat things. And I like to always quote Atwood's law: if it can be written in JavaScript, it will be written in JavaScript. So, and they even have now browser-based AI that runs neural networks in the browser that can do face recognition, which is just amazing, right? You used to think that would take hundreds of computers, and now it can just run in your browser and recognize. So it's just really cool. It's a lot of fun. You can be very productive. That's why a lot of companies are really adopting JavaScript, is the productiveness of that across a lot of stacks. So I want to go into just a brief introduction of React Native, and I'm not going to talk too much about React other than React is a framework or a library in JavaScript that helps front-end engineers really write user experiences. And it's probably the leader right now amongst a whole slew of frameworks, from Angular to Vue to React, are sort of the big 3, and they're racing. And then there's about, 100 more frameworks out there to choose from, and there's more coming every day, it seems like. But I think React really hit an abstraction layer that works. And what's interesting, from that project, React Native was born. And React Native was born by a group in Facebook, and they basically really wanted to see how they could take this abstraction and apply it to the mobile platforms. And that's how React Native was born. It's a bridge, and what's interesting, before that you had things like Cordova, you may have heard of Ionic. Those platforms basically put a web browser in a shell in an app, and then all the code runs in a web browser. React Native actually works with native components. So when you run your mobile application, it's actually running native code, whether it's Android or iOS, and then JavaScript's running all the business logic. And there's a couple of advantages that you get with that. One is a lot of people know JavaScript. A lot of developers know JavaScript, so finding people to work on this is not a bit of an ebb and flow. Like sometimes there's a lot of iOS developers available, sometimes there's no iOS developers available. Sometimes there's a lot of Android, sometimes there's no. But there's always JavaScript developers available. The other benefit to this approach that I think is kind of cool is what's called code pushing. So if anyone's deployed a mobile app, you know that it's really not a lot of fun to get through the App Store, right? And you want to avoid having to do that as many times as possible. You have to do it once, but with this, it gives you a way to do code pushing so you can deploy your app, and you're essentially deploying the shell that's pointing to a bundle of JavaScript in the cloud, and then when you change that bundle, it automatically pushes that on the client. So you can deploy one core, if you will, onto the App Store, and then as you iterate and improve, you make a tweak here, make a tweak there. You can do continuous deployment techniques to constantly give that to your users, and you don't have to worry about supporting users that are on version 1 when you're on version 20, because that's no fun, right? The support calls raise, and no one, how many of you have gone to the app update page? I bet you at least have more than 10 apps that have an upgrade that you haven't updated. You know, it's not a thing that we think about. I don't think about it until they yell at me and say, you can't use this until you upgrade. And it's always like, man, you know, because you wanted to use that right away. So that's sort of a little bit of background about what React Native is. Now, why React Native? You know, I sort of dug into that a little bit, but you know, one of the things of the title of this talk is shortening the feedback loop. With compiled languages like Objective-C, Swift is dynamic, but Java, those take a long time. So you do a build step, and then you've got to run either the simulator or run it on your phone, and that can be a lot of time in between cycles. And when I say time, to me, 30 seconds before I see my update is too long, right? I want something, you know, I'm happy with 5 seconds. And that's one of the things that React Native does, is you make a change, and you'll see that today. You can see that change really in a second on your simulator, which is kind of nice. And, you know, React Native is this idea of managing a concept, and you can write different edge cases. So if you have specific uses for Android or specific uses for like an iPad, you can break that down, but it gives you the ability to have one kind of code base. And what's coming in the future is React Native Web. So potentially in the future, and it's looking really good, that you could have one code base for your mobile and web experiences. And I'm really excited about that. And then the teamwork, right? So I think I touched on that. Now, one of the great things to look at when you're looking at trying to determine if you want to invest your time in a project or not is go read the documentation. Don't even download anything, don't even play anything, just go read the documentation. And if you're struggling with the documentation, you know, maybe wait a little bit for that project, because you're going to go through a lot of pain, unless you like pain, right? So that's one thing that I'm here today to talk about React Native is, and I think I talked about this almost a year ago this time when it was really starting to come together. Now it is pretty mature. There's a lot less churn, and their documentation is really, really well done. So it really takes you through an experience, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a test drive, but if you want to get into this, you can really go to the documentation and pick up at least 60% of the basics just by spending 3 or 4 hours going through the tutorial. So it's really good and constantly improving. So today we're gonna build an app. We've got about 45 minutes. So you get to watch me code for 45 minutes, and hopefully you'll code with me. So if you see a bug, just yell it out. I do create bugs, and especially in front of an audience, I will probably make a lot of typos. But I've got a screen set up, so I don't think it'll be super painful. But for me, I ask, well, if I was being introduced a new technology, I want to see the real experience, right? I want to see sort of test drive the car. So this demo is a lot better than me just talking about promises or assumptions, and you can sort of see it. And then in the slide deck, I've got some extras of things you can look to that are sort of add-ons to the ecosystem, and it's super huge, but these are things that I've used. So I've got that in the slide deck. Yep.
What are the downsides to React Native?
Well, there's a couple. Well, it's not downsides. It's just trade-offs, right? So if your application is got a lot of custom mobile components or devices, right? That's just not in that standard stack. It may be less effort for you to do the React experience and do the interoperability than just write it in Objective-C, write it in Android.
When you say devices, you mean
like mobile devices, like
GPS or different types of phones?
Yeah, if let's say you had a really proprietary camera component that could recognize bananas, right? And you had it patented, you had it under IP, and you wanted to build an app around that to be as efficient as possible, right? And it's not something that I would say 80% of the roadway would be. Then you may want to invest more time in native. A perfect example really is games, right? Games, you're probably caring about CPU, and you're caring about how fast that response time is to the user. And using a declarative or a higher level language like JavaScript or React, the trade-off is you're not going to get as great of a performance as like a C++ or assembly, right? So I think that's really probably the best measure, is to think if you have a lot of high interactivity that needs a lot of high response, and you want it to be as fast as possible, then going down to the metal is the approach, right? But for the most part, that argument is becoming less and less, because this project Expo will actually take all of the common sort of core components of a mobile device, like GPS, maps, camera, barcode, QR readers, audio, visual, and just about everything you can think of in a standard thing, and it's all packaged up and integrated for you.
And an API that works across both Android and iPhone?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So there's a lot you can do now with React Native opposed to what was there 2 years ago, where you're like, I've got to go either full native or not use these features because the camera API for the web was not that great, right? You couldn't get much control or power. Now you can build full teleconferencing systems with React Native for mobile devices that work with tools like WebRTC and things like that. All right, so let me go to the demo. So one of the things is just getting started, and I'm not going to go through the process of getting started, but it's really, really simple, especially if you're a JavaScript developer. You install Node.js as your platform, and then you run a couple of command line scripts to install what's called Create React Native App. And Create React Native App is a CLI or command line interface that will create a template or a boilerplate for your application. And that's what I've done here. So over to the right, we're actually running this application, and in the middle screen here, we've got our code, and on this screen, this is your app running in a simulator. What's really cool about React Native, and I won't demo it today, but you can actually real-time link your device if it's on the same Wi-Fi network, whether it's Android or iOS. You can link it to your code, and you see your code change on your device in real time as you code, which is kind of nice. So what we've done is we've created a React Native app, and we're going to do a quote of the day app, right? Because quotes are fun to look at. Over here to the right, if you're familiar with web development, this will look very familiar to you. So we've got import React, we've got a style sheet, a text, and a view component. The only thing you'll notice is there's no HTML. The HTML-like syntax, instead of using H1s and divs and spans, what React Native did was they created a basic abstraction layer called view and text and image and button, and allowed that to be your elements. So it's kind of weird at first because you're like, where's my H1? But it's also actually refreshing because those smaller constraints, you're not like worrying, should this be an H2 or should this be a span or should this be a div, you know, and it's just either it's a view or a text pretty much when you're printing it out. And with the development setup out of the box, you get live reloading. So I can say foo, and when I hit save, you can see it reload onto the right. So that's that feedback loop I was talking about. And you can even get what's called hot reloading. So if I go in my simulator and I shake, I can turn off live reload, and I can enable hot reloading, which will then keep the state of the app, and anything I change, it will maintain the state. So if I'm on page 3 and I make a change, it's going to stay on page 3. It won't go back to the beginning, which is kind of nice as well. So we've got our sort of little app here, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a quote app. You're just going to click on the screen and a new quote will come up. And I think this will cover a lot of the basic bits of this platform. So we've got a view, and we've got a style attribute, and we've got a couple of text boxes. And so I'm going to just cut and paste this quote. I'm going to first just sort of put some hard-coded data in so we can sort of see how everything looks and do some styling on it. Not super great styling because I am not a graphic designer, but it'll be a little bit better than this. So when you do styles with React Native, you don't have this idea of a global style sheet. You actually create your styles in each component, and you do it in JavaScript. So it looks a little bit like CSS, but it's actually JavaScript. And you'll notice instead of the hyphens, it's camel case. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of styles for our text box. So we're going to add quote. And I don't even know if this font's going to work or not. And I'll talk about fonts, but we'll see. So margin, you have margin top, margin bottom. You also have margin horizontal and margin vertical, which is shortcuts for both left and right and top and bottom. Let's do green and margin top 16. Okay, so now we've got our styles. We just have to apply them to the elements. So we use the style attribute, and the curly braces in React represents executable content. So that's where we can put JavaScript, and we're just going to do styles and quote, and then styles and author. If I save that, I should get an error, right? That's the great thing about this, even though this error happened, it's that I get that signal right on the screen. And that's kind of important. Instead of getting sort of that white screen of death, I get real good feedback that an error has occurred. And most of the time it's informative, right? But if anyone's worked with JavaScript knows that, it's not always that informative. So let's just take that out for right now. Let's see. Okay, cool. So we got a little bit of styles, and you can see if we wanted to make the margins a little bit bigger. I tend to do things in 8s. So 8, 16, 24, 32, and that works pretty well. And the React Native helps with the different devices and the different dots per inch, or the DPI, and they give you just an average. So if you do 16, the number 16 is going to look very similar on every device, but that you may want to do some tweaking there too. So we've got our quote, and we've styled it to something that's better than it was. And now what we want to think about is, okay, we've got this component. What are all the states that this component can be in? And this one's pretty simple. It's going to be either in a loading state where it's going to fetch a quote. It's going to be in the quote state that it has a quote so it can show, or the error state. So we're going to add these constants to help us keep track of that, so that we can control the view layer, and it can just react, if you will, to what state it is and know what to present in that state. So we've got those, and then what we want to do is we want to go to a server and load a quote dynamically. So we want to make our view actually show a random quote. And I'll just pull up the web browser. Make sure, so if we go to localhost 5000, I've got a little API, and every time I hit that API, I get a new quote. So that's what we're going to do, is connect our app to that API.
Are you using Node for that?
Yes, so I am using Node, and it's it'll be in the repo, so you can check it out. So React has lifecycle hooks. These lifecycle hooks run functions at various stages of a component. The one we're going to use is called component did mount, and that runs once when the component is mounted to the screen. So when this component is mounted to the screen, we're going to use a tool called fetch, which will connect to our REST API. We just give it a URL. $5,000. And we could give it some other information, but by default it's going to do a get verb, and it's going to handle content type as application JSON. So we'll do then, and we're going to convert the response that comes back to JSON. And it's a promise-based API, so every time I do a .then, whatever I return in the first .then goes as the first argument in the next .then's function. So right now we're just going to log out the response, and we're going to go ahead and add a catch for an error, and we're just going to log that out too. One of the nice things about React Native is that you just use console log, and it will log out to the CLI. If you've ever worked with Cordova, it doesn't have that. It's kind of difficult to attach debugging and things like that. And if you want to attach your Chrome debugger, you can go into the simulator and shake it, and then say debug remote.js, and that will actually pull up the Chrome inspector, and you can step through your code that way, which is kind of cool. So we can see that our app is running, and we're console logging the quote. So we got the quote from the database, which is kind of cool. So we verified that. Now what we want to do is we want to create some state for our component. We want to create some internal state. One will keep the state of what stage it's in, is what term I'm using today. So that's called a component state. And then the other would hold the quote, and then another node will hold an error. So we're going to, I think this should be component state. Let's copy that here. Okay. Now we're going to set this to loading. And then in our component did mount, we're going to, instead of doing this console log, let's comment that out, we're going to actually call a function called setState off of the component. So it'll be handling this promise, we get the quote, and then we say this.setState, and then we pass it an object. And when we pass it this object, it's going to change the state from loading to quote, and then it's going to also change the quote that's empty to this value. And it's going to tell React that it changed, so React will know that it needs to do a repaint. And that's why you have to call setState instead of just applying it to the public property state. So we've got that, and now what we want to do in our view area, our render area, is actually take the quote text and display that instead of our hard-coded text. So we'll use the curly braces because we want JavaScript, and then we'll say this.state dot quote text. And then in our author, we're going to do the same thing. This.state dot quote author. Okay. Now when I save it, it's going to go out to the API and paint whatever the API came back with. It's kind of cool, right? Pretty easy. But one of the things that we have to think about is, what if we have a slow API, right? So we want to look at user experience. Let's see if I can find my API. So we've got our API here. What if this was 2,000 seconds and we went to reload? It's no fun, right? So maybe we want to do something else. Maybe we want to show some sort of indicator while the API is loading, and that's for the loading state. So it's in the loading state. Why not? Let's add a check. Let's see. To see if the component state is loading, let's show an activity indicator, right? So if it's loading, let's show an activity indicator. And we don't have that imported, so we have to go up here to React Native and import it. Now we have an activity indicator. Now, one of the things you'll see down here is a lot of warnings. So these warnings are kind of nice, they're helpful for a developer, but if we're running this in production mode, the warnings disappear. And this project is open source, and React is open source. React shipped a new version that's got a lot of updates, and React Native hasn't caught up to it. So we're getting these warnings, but we can just change into production mode. And now if we refresh the simulator, we won't get those warnings. Or maybe we will. Okay, we shouldn't get them. Well, okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So now we've got our loading state, and I'll go ahead and change the API so we don't have to watch for 2 seconds every time it refreshes. But what if we have an error? Yeah, we want to have an error state. So instead of catching this error and just logging it out, maybe we should change the. Does anyone know what we should do here?
Set state to error state.
There you go. See, you're awake. This isn't too boring. So we'll say component state. Okay. And so now, if our API throws an error, we're going to set it to error state, and we just need to add a handler for that. So if let's do it here. If component state equals error, then let's just show a nice red screen with white text, because people love that. Let's see. And let's just do.
It's almost as good as advertisements.
Okay, so let's make it have an error, right? Let's throw an error. So let's go to our API, throw an error, and then let's refresh, and let's see if we threw an error. Shouldn't have. Okay. This thing is resilient. Let's see. If component state, this dot state. There we go. So now we've got our error state handled. And you can make that super nice. You can do the little GitHub AutoCAD or whatever you want. But the point is thinking about those states when you have components and going ahead and putting those edge cases in, because it's very easy with this feedback loop to just do the successful path, and then you get caught with, well, it loads in less than a second on my phone, but someone at the airport is trying to get their quote before they get to the airline, and they hit that dead zone, right? And they're not very happy because they wanted to have their quote before they stood in line to check into a gate.
Would you spin off some kind of error reporting back to your server?
Yeah. So you have full capability to do that. You can tie in. There's analytics modules you can plug into the mobile device that takes care of that for you, or you can roll your own. So yeah.
I'm guessing you'd spin something off into cache versus putting it in the render.
Right.
Okay.
But you also want to also handle when they're totally offline too. So you might want to cache those errors, and then when they come back online, shoot them up. Cool. So let's see if we're back to happy path. Right. Now the last thing I want to do is create a little button so that every time we click, we get a new quote. So to do that, we just bring in our button component. And there's a whole host of components you can use. There's a bunch of component libraries like native base that have all material UI, so you can build off of that and you don't have to start from scratch. But I really wanted to demo React Native and not confuse you with a bunch of libraries you can load. So we'll just pull in this little button in our render. And we've got a little button here. Let's change the author's margin bottom to 32. So I'm going to push it down a little bit. And the style system that I'm using is Flexbox. If you're familiar with web, Flexbox is a very nice way to deal with layouts. And it comes for free in React Native. And so right now I've got Flexbox, which is taking up the whole container and aligning everything in the center. And then my text nodes are just stacked on top of each other, but they're all in the center. You could say move them to the top or move them to the bottom, or say space around or space between, and do a lot of different things. So when this button is pressed, we want to call a function. We need to create that function on our component. So we'll do that right here. And one of the things that's new with React is you can create a property, and then you can assign it a function with an arrow syntax. And that'll automatically bind that function to the instance. Before you would have to call .bind. Now you don't. You can just use the arrow syntax, which makes it really much nicer. And we're going to add this code right here. Okay. And okay. So basically we've got the same code that we had in our did component mount, and now if we hit get quote, we've got a click event connected. And this is kind of redundant, right? So we can go to our component did mount and then just say this dot get quote. And, you know, in 30 minutes, you've got a nice app, you know. Thanks. And the cool thing is like once you get this to where you want it to be, you're ready to, say, get some internal people to test it. All you have to do is say exp, which is the module you load, and publish, and you have an Expo account set up, or it'll walk you through setting that up. It will publish that bundle, and you can download this Expo client on your phone, and or give it to anyone else and give them a link, and they will be able to test your app in an unlisted state. And you can get feedback from users without having to even go through test flight or go through any of these provisioning pieces for beta testing. It's really, really cool. And then you can take another stage of going to test flight. And one of the other nice benefits of this is it's got a manifest file called app.json. And one of the things that I've always struggled with is getting all the icons for all the different form factors, right? Well, you can just provide a 1024 by 1024 ping, and Expo will figure all that stuff out for you too. Same thing with splash screen. So you can just say icon quotes PNG, splash screen quotes splash PNG, and then ship it, and Expo will do all of that slicing and dicing, which is no fun, right? You know, like, and then the last thing is, once you're ready to go and it's published, you can actually use Expo to do a build for iOS and Android, and it will actually build the IPA file and the APK file and do all the certificate handshakings for you. All you have to do is have an Apple developer account and a Google developer account, and then you can just upload it to their app stores for review. So they really put a lot of thought in this from the developer experience perspective, and giving us tools to really focus on the fun part more, and really build products and not worry about the pain of like slicing icons to dealing with App Store. And the App Store, you still have to deal with the review, but if anyone has ever took code and compiled it in Xcode and went through, well, is this my test version, my dev version, my production version? Do I have this certificate in my keychain? Do I have this certificate? It is no fun. And you read these white papers that, you know, you feel like you're just digging for a needle in a haystack. So they really focused on that with this Expo build system, and it's 100% free. It's they may charge for it in the future, but right now it's free, and you can go a very long way, and at any point in time you can eject, right? So at any point in time you can eject your code and go the normal Xcode or Android pathway. So it always gives you a way out. So I think it's a really, really cool platform, and you know, I just deployed it on EXP, and it's on my phone spinning right now. But you have this link, and that link you run it in the Expo client, and you got your app, and you can see it go. So and anybody, you could set that up for anybody to do it. So it's I think it's really cool stuff. And the last thing I want to say is, I think that we're just right around the corner from this React Native web being really mature, where you can write React Native code, just like I've done here, run it in the browser. So I think in 6 months, maybe a little bit longer, you will really be able to build with one code base a fairly, you know, I would say small to mid application with one code base, which would be pretty awesome.
Does that mean like Electron style app as well?
Yeah.
Native Mac
Yep.
or native PC?
Yeah, yeah.
So what do you think it would take? So let's say you're developing React, you know, web applications now, and then this comes out 6 months from now, to get that kind of moved over or migrated to that. Do you think there's going to be a lot of work, or?
I don't think so, because most of them use tools like Flexbox as their styles, and really it's changing your templates. So if you use your components modeled really well, then you really should be able to just go into the lower level of your component models and change div to view, you know, span to text, right? But Stephen, you want to answer that one? What do you think as a React developer, if you looked at this?
I don't know if it's available today, but I know, for instance, I'm doing a rewrite now from AngularJS to React, and there's a library out there that just converts all the layout for you. Just HTML parser. So I'm sure there'll be something like that where you can just import that pretty soon, where you can do the same thing from React to React Native Web.
It doesn't seem like there's a huge use case if you already have a React app running in the web to port your mobile app back to it, unless you're just trying to get the code base the same.
Yeah, well, I think again, it's gotta get stable and mature. But I think the use case is, with progressive web apps and the popularity of that, being able to build a React Native app in the web in a prototype and get it to a bunch of people and iterate just through the web, and then you find out that you need to drop down to more of a native experience, being able to flip a switch.
Or if you start with mobile and then
Right.
want to have a web.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Twitter started with mobile with their app, and now they have a PWA and it's written in React Native Web. So they're sharing their same code base, but they have the PDA for the web light or the app light version, and they have the mobile client, the rich client. And it's trade-offs, right? Some users like the App Store and they don't want to ever leave the App Store. That's their safety world for accessing apps. And then some users hate the App Store and they want to go to a web page and they want to bookmark the app onto the device. So I think we're just going to see a lot more of that. And I'm glad that there's innovation in this space, because it's one thing to have a team of developers focusing on an app with one stack, but to have 3 stacks and trying to keep all the features aligned is a nightmare, right? So anyway, some takeaways. The get starting document, font loading, you have access to all fonts and you load them on the device. The one thing I say about understanding that is, just like I showed the loading state, when your app fires up, you want to make sure all your fonts are loaded before you show your first view. And the native experience gives you the splash screen, so it's going to show a splash screen for you. Learn Flexbox, and there's a great ecosystem of components. If like Atwood's Law, I mean, there's people building augmented reality apps in React Native today and just handing them over to their developer friends for birthday presents, right? It's crazy how far this stuff has become. And TV apps. The other thing is, this is great to build TV apps. If you want to put a Twitter alert app on your Apple TV, it's super easy to do. That's it. So thank you. Any other questions?
So you were using Flexbox positioning for that. Is the positioning really the same or similar to the web positioning? Does fixed positioning, absolute, and relative positioning work?
It has Flexbox and Absolute. Flexbox and Absolute are the two. So it's sort of a subset. And Absolute works really, really well. And actually, I saw a developer actually take the pixels from a Sketch app and write a component that does the math between that and the React Native DPI. And so then you can just go and sort of, as a developer, highlight the object, get the pixels, and then just put that in, and it'll translate that to whatever form factor you're using. So some really cool stuff there. But the relative, I don't think so much. It's either, from my experience, it's either Flex or Absolute. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on that when styles are declared, on each widget, can you create your own library? I mean, just to start managing that at any sort of scale seems like a nightmare to me.
Yeah.
So could you just create how have you handled that?
Yeah. So you can, so they're just objects, and so you can handle, they're JavaScript objects. You can handle that by building or using theme libraries, so that you can have all of your sort of core, sort of specific to your brand variables in one file. And then you can have specific themes for like a card, for a list, for whatever, all in one place. And then you would just have a list component. You would have a card component, a button component, and it would always have your
So you
styles.
just import those. And
Yeah, just import them.
Okay.
Yeah.
You ever tried to use like a less or a SAS, so you're compiling from the same declarations for your web style sheets as well as there?
Yeah, so it doesn't support less or SAS because it is, so basically they wrote their own CSS engine to run on native and do the transpond. So there's no, it's not even real CSS.
Right.
It's JavaScript notated CSS. You wouldn't have a lot of luck with that.
Right. Probably go the other way though.
Yeah. you
Probably
could go that way.
parse the JSON from this and
Yes.
feed it to some sort of.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Tom, what do you think of the React Native dimensions?
They're pretty awesome when you have to get lower level and do components like I designed a progress bar component that was, had to be designed this way. Nothing that was in the ecosystem worked, and so I took two divs and had one div the width and one div sort of show progress based on the steps, and being able to use the dimensions component, which gives you whatever form factor it is, it gives you the height and width of that, and you can do the math programmatically to calculate that for each responsive device. It's a little tedious, but it's nice to have that tool when you need it. All right. Yep.
Quick question, what's your experience in integrating things like Google Maps?
Yeah. So let me see if I can show you that really quick. I didn't show. Let's see. Show this in the demo, but because I didn't want to. I love Expo, but there's Expo and React Native. Expo is sort of like a stack on top of React Native that gives you the ability to integrate a lot of native components out of the box. And they have components like map, audio, barcode scanner, and literally if you wanted to start using a map, all you do is add that map, to your renderer, and you import it in, and then you give it your region. And let's see if I can't get the preview on this, because sometimes it's kind of slow. Yeah. But anyway, let's see. Let me try that. Yeah, it's going to wait 6. Maybe it'll kick in. But basically, it's very easy. You just include a third-party component. In this case, we're including map view from Expo, and then you put the component in your render, and you change your variables, and you've got a map. And there's all kinds of components, like these are all focused on Expo, but then there's, like I said, an entire ecosystem of component libraries purely for React Native. So this, odds are, unless you're solving a very unique problem, there's something out there to help you. Great. All right.
You want to wait for it to load or no?
Is it moving?
Yeah.
So it's down to 2?
But in the meantime, thank you all for coming out. As always, if you have any topics that you would love to listen in on or to present at the Fridays of the Corridor, just let us know. Laura is actually going to be presenting next month.
Hey.
So make sure you come on out to that as well, and thank you to Tom. But just let us know if you guys have any questions or comments, ideas, any of that.
Yeah, the last one, well, we're on one, so one quick announcement. Cool. Syntax Cons. Everybody know about Syntax Con, June 6th, 7th, and 8th? There's going to be a lot of great talks there, so let's go. Open up Snack Expo, scan the QR code. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll share the slides and you can go through it and see it.
Or,
All right, thank you. Yep.
Thank you.